And then a further reform in 2004 when they finally introduced the concept of direct election of district heads, where before the district heads, the governors, the bupati and wali kota were elected by the DPRD members. It was slightly more democratic because these DPRD members were the result of the democratic elections, well, the more democratic elections in 1999, and then they elected the head. But starting in 2004, we have the direct elections where we, the constituents, get to go to the poll and vote for our bupati or wali kota. The timing for the democratically indirect and direct election. By indirect elections, I meant it was the appointment of bupati and wali kota by the democratically elected DPRD. And then the direct elections, I referred to the direct election that was introduced starting in 2005 after the law was passed in 2004. And the timing of the direct election was fairly exogenous because the direct elections were only introduced after the incumbent finished the term. So the incumbent is allowed to finish their term, and therefore the timing of direct elections is different from one district to another. And this period of incumbent can be traced all the way back to the colonial era. So the timing was fairly exogenous, which is very favorable for our econometric analysis, for our empirical analysis later. So the central question is, now that we have decentralization and democratization at the local level, does it lead to better local governance? Does it really true that when the decision is made closer to the constituents, that it actually going to bring up a better governance at the local level? The problem is, how do we measure good governance? There aren't any single governance indicators that are available for all kabupaten kota in Indonesia for a long period of time after decentralization until the recent one. And then the other problems that we need to figure out is how do we identify the effects of democratizations. Now Indonesia, as I said, it provides an interesting case study because it's a young democracy, it has a far-reaching decentralization. It has the democratization at the local level with a timing that is fairly exogenous. And in terms of the good governance, we think it would be interesting to look at the excessive administrative spending as a measure of governance quality. Because in this case, what we think is that, look, if they are spending too much on themselves, if they are spending too much on administering the government, what are the determinants of this? Does it really need it that they spend that much money to administer our local government, or is there something else? To start doing that, we are looking at the definition of the local government administrative spending, and we use the definition that is provided directly by the data from the Ministry of Finance, which is basically the expenditures incurred to administer the local government level. The expenditures incurred to administer local governments, and if you are familiar with the database here at the World Bank, the DAPUR, it was coded 1, the General Government Administration Function. And if you look back to the previous budget report regulations by the Ministry of Home Affairs, that we know that it's part of the bagian urusan umum pemerintahan. Now, the items under bagian urusan umum pemerintahan or the General Government Administration cover development planning, unity and local politics, general government, personnel, people and village involvement, statistic office, and archive. And when we look closely at the general government, that consists about 86% of the administrative spending, that this general government actually consists of the offices of the Bupati and Wali Kota, Sekda, DPRD, Dispenda, and BPKD. So these are the category that we're looking at. These are the category that we need to identify what are the expenditures that they incur in order to administer the local government. Now, as you can see, the administrative spending at the local government level is quite high. Even for international standard, it takes about 30% of the budget, and the international standard is about 5%. There are like the counties in the US and UK have like about 3%. There are some African countries that have administrative spending at the local level at around 15%. So the local government in Indonesia have relatively high share of administrative spending. It takes up about 30%, and it's second only after education, and it's even more than infrastructure and health in terms of share. And if you see in the second graph, you can see that the share of administrative spending is relatively stable. So it's high since the beginning of decentralization and remained high until well, the latest year that we observe here is 2009. And now we wonder, like, what are the causes of these? Why do they need that high government administrative spending? Some literature say that perhaps it's because of the splitting of districts. As you know, that in the beginning of decentralization we had about 336 districts. Now at the end of, well, not at the end, but now in the 2014 we had about 505 districts. So the number of districts almost doubled, and the period that I'm analyzing here is from 2001 until 2009, and the number of districts at the end of 2009, at the beginning of 2009, the number of districts that receive local government transfer from the intergovernmental fiscal transfer from the central government was about 477 districts. So is the proliferation of new districts is the cause of this high administrative spending? Or is there something else? Is it because, you know, decentralization is they are corrupting the money, they're using the money for something else? Do they, like, I mean, we know from all the anecdotal evidence that since decentralization, they start building these nice offices for the local government in Indonesia. I mean, if you have experience of going to the districts, you'll be surprised by the size and just the size and how luxurious the local government's offices is. And then there are some anecdotal evidence that show that these spending under government administration was actually, to some extent, were misappropriated. Like we know, the Bupati of Garut and then the Bupati of Talaut were now in prison because of the corruption of business travel spending. The governor of East Kalimantan and Riau provinces, they have like Mercedes-Benz and Land Cruiser as their official cars. And also recently the Tasikmalaya Corruption Watch found evidence of corruption of business travel spending by the Bupati and his deputy also in Tasikmalaya. So we go back to our research question. So what are the determinants of this administrative spending? Now, the theories say that, you know, decentralization will bring decision-making closer to the people. There is, because of that, there's an informational advantage. The local government know more about what the local needs are. So therefore, it promotes, and then decentralization will also promote interjurisdictional competition that allows for mobile resource to sort itself. And then it will improve better preference matching. And in terms of democratization, the literature say that, look, democratic accountability through re-election constrained by Fairjohn, and then if they are uninformed voters, we'll use yardstick competition to actually penalize the incumbent through election. And therefore, decentralization will make accountability more direct. So in that case, then theory implies that the democratization should, to some extent, strengthen accountability and improve governance quality. Now, but also there are literature that indicates that, look, bureaucratics have self-interest. Once they have more resources, they will try to spend it on themselves. And then there's this local capture that basically the local level might be less transparent, the capacity might be lower, it might be less competitive, so the possibility of capture by the local elites is higher. And then there's this theoretical model by Bardan and Mukherjee in their seminal paper that actually conclude that local capture is higher when electoral competition is lower. lobby groups are better organized, and the share of uninformed voters is larger. So therefore, based on this, we can imply that the impact of decentralization and democratization really depend on the local condition, and potentially the impact will be non-uniform. So when we look at our research question and we ask ourselves what are the determinants of these high administrative spendings, is it because of the technical factors? Is it because of the characteristics of the district itself? Because it's remote, because the area is huge, because the population is high? Or is it because of the financial endowment, as this can imply that, look, I mean, when they have more resources, they have the tendency to spend it on themselves, the bureaucratic self-interest? Or is it because of the splitting districts? Because as we all know, that the new districts do need all this building, all these new offices. Can democratically elected district have reduced the administrative spending? We assume that once they are directly elected, accountability is stronger. Can it actually decrease administrative spending if we see administrative spending as a local capture? And how about the political competition? When the political competition is high at the local level, do they actually make the local government more disciplined and therefore decrease the government administrative spending? Now, in order to answer those questions, we try to do an empirical analysis using a sample of unbalanced panel of 418 districts out of the 477 that exist. We exclude Aceh, Papua, Papua Barat, and Jakarta, simply because we try to use a panel data sets, and then there are so many missing indicators for Aceh and Papua, so we decided to drop them. We use the unbalanced panel because we want to explore the dynamic of splitting districts to know the difference between the parent and the child districts, and the period that we're looking at is from 2001 to 2009. And for the administrative expenditure, as I explained in the previous slide, we are going to use the definition provided by the Ministry of Finance, and the data is available also at the Dapur of the World Bank. And we are looking at administrative expenditure, the total, as well as the economic classification. The staff expenditures, the goods and services expenditures, the capital expenditures, as well as there's these other categories that we will see later. And then we also compile some political variables at the local level, which basically is the result of the elections that we have throughout this period that you observe. We have two elections, the 1999 election and then the 2004 election. So we try to look at the results of the DPRD election at the local level, the result of the DPRD election, and look at the party shares of all the party that was participated in the election at the time that was in the DPRD. And then of course there are a bunch of other variables that for control that I will explain later, that mostly comes from the BPS as well as Ministry of Finance. The empirical setup is quite simple. We are basically going to estimate the natural logarithm of administrative spending per capita. It's a panel data sets that explain the I is the subscript I is for the districts, and the subscript T is for the time. The factor X is for the timing variant controls. We are interested in looking at the size to test for the economies of scale. So we're looking at area, we're looking at the topographical condition of the districts, and then we are also trying to control for the distance to the center, which is Jakarta. And then factor Z is basically the time variant controls that includes the population, number of villages, urbanization, and then some economic and fiscal variables. Literacy rate, and then we have these democratization dummies, as I explained before, that actually give us an indication of a period where a district had an indirectly elected head, as well as a period where the district had a directly elected head. And then for the second set of regressions that I will explain later, we have a political concentration variables, we have a time dummy, we have a splitting dummies. The splitting dummies is basically, we are looking at the district that's split. We create two dummies, one is for the parent, one is for the child. For the parent, we look at 4 years before it's split, and then 5 years after it's split. And for the districts, we are looking at 5 years after the district was created. And then, of course, we have standard errors, which are basically clustered at the parent district level. Now, here's the results of our baseline estimation that basically use all the indicators that I've mentioned before. And as you can see, we have evidence of economies of scale. Districts with higher population actually have lower government administrative spending. Area, districts that are bigger actually spend more, but only on capital, only on capital and goods and services. The topographical condition, like in this case, the share of landlocked villages. We assume that because it's landlocked, it's easier and more accessible, and therefore the administrative spending is lower the more share of landlocked villages you have. Urbanization seems like the more urbanized an area is, the more sophisticated type of administration that they require, therefore the government administration expenditure is high. It is quite alarming to see that the elasticity of fiscal revenue is close to 1, which basically kind of like confirm this kind of hypothesis about how the more resources they are, the more they spend on themselves. And then the per capita GDP basically indicate that, look, the bigger the economy you are, and then the more you spend on administering yourselves. In terms of literacy rate, we see that it's negative, it's encouraging. Literacy rate, we try to measure that whether or not if the literacy rate, if the education that kind of like represent the education level of the constituents, the higher it is, the lower the government administrative spending, but it's only significant for capital and other. Now, here for the estimation for the total, the second column, and then the rest of the economic classification, we also include the split effects that I explained before. And the split effects will let us know what is the impact of the splitting districts to the government administrative spending. Now, as you can see here, the bottom part gives you the staff spending. So we're looking at it based on the economic classification, and the top graphs gives you the administrative spending on staff. Now what you see is basically look for the parent. The changes is not significant. You only see a significant increase like about a year before it's split. For a child, the first year they started with a very low number, but then after the third year of split, the staff expenditure increases and almost go back to normal. So this is when it comes to staff. The interesting part is the capital expenditure. As you can see, for the parent one, it didn't change. So there was no effect for the parent, which is understandable because the parent do not have to build new buildings. But for the child, however, they do need to build new buildings. So you can see that for the first and the second year after it's split, the government administrative spending is actually significantly higher, but then it went down on the third year, and then remained relatively stable until the fifth year after it's split. Now, what you see here is basically the splitting district effect show a change in the composition of administrative spending. Like they spend less on staff, but then the staff increases. And then for a child, they spend more on capital in the beginning, but then it went back down after the third year. Because of this change in composition of administrative spending, we don't observe any effect at the aggregate level on total administrative spending. As you can see for both the parent districts and the child districts, before and after the split, basically there's no significant difference of the size, the coefficients of the splitting dummy for the parent and the child. Now, how about the direct elections? So this is basically the same specification, but in addition, we have the direct election dummy that basically won when they had a direct election and then directly elected head for the rest of the period of the directly elected head. And then we try to interact it with the literacy rate and also the fiscal revenue. The literacy rate to control whether or not the electoral effects actually take into account the education level of the constituents. Also, we'll look at the effect of fiscal revenue, whether or not there is an additional impact of direct election related to fiscal revenue. And what we observe here is basically there are generally no impact of the direct election, except in a column 4 and 5, where we see that the impact of the direct election is actually positive, and it only decreases as the districts get richer. So when the districts has actually more fiscal endowment, which are basically the richer districts, then it starts to lower the government administrative spending. But for those districts that would have relatively low fiscal endowment, that basically after direct elections, they actually increase the government administrative spending. And then now we limit the sample to some of the districts that do not split to use the political variables that we have. And we have some interesting results. Now, the political concentration index basically gives you the concentration of political parties in the PRD. So the higher it is, means that there is one or a few selected parties that actually have higher share of votes in the DPRD. And what you see basically here is that the higher political concentration at the local level, it actually increases the administrative spending. And if you use the majority indicator, which basically indicate if there is any political party that have more than 50% of the votes in the DPRD, then it actually also increases the government administrative spending. And interestingly, when we try the share of top 5 party that get the votes in both elections, and only the share of Golkar that came out significant. That shows that the more Golkar politicians you have in the DPRD, it looks like you're spending more on your government administrative spending. So this is what we have so far based on the political side of this. So, what can we conclude? I say that yes, administrative spending in Indonesia is excessive and is persistently high. Unfortunately, creation of new districts is not the reason, because as you can see that the changes in composition of administrative spending after the split is kind of reasonable, that the new districts need to build these new buildings, and the parent districts do not seem to change the level of their capital expenditures before the split. We see a little bit of change in the staff, but then we don't see any aggregate effect for the total administrative spending. Unfortunately, the direct election of district heads have no disciplining effect. However, we can see that the impact of political competition is quite encouraging, because the wasteful rent seeking is larger in districts with lower political competition. Education, although not as strong as the other political variables, but it seems that education does matter. The higher the literacy rate, the less government administrative spending, particularly for the other category as well as the capital expenditure category. And also for those that have more homogeneous ethnic concentration, it seems like the wasteful rent seeking is larger. So I guess just try to stimulate some discussion in terms of the policy. Now we know that, I mean, I'm not a political scientist myself, but based on the political science papers that I've read, looks like with the direct election, the dynamic is different. Like instead of when they were appointing the local government, when they are appointing the district heads, when the DPRD is still appointing the district heads, they are basically trying to offer something. But now, in the case of direct election, looks like they are selling the nominations, or basically they are trying to get anyone who wants to be Bupati and Wali Kota, they can get nominated by buying the nomination. So I guess this is one of the reasons, according to the some political science, that this is one of the reasons why the accountability mechanism at the local level is really not as strong as it should be, and therefore we cannot really observe the effect of direct elections that we are hoping for. So if we increase transparency in terms of political competition at the local level, will it help? If there is a higher competition in the political process at the local level, will it help? If we lower the barriers to entry to political market, will it help? Meaning that if we now allow an independent candidates to run for election at the local level, will it help? I try to stimulate a policy discussion, but definitely based on our findings that, look, I mean, local competition is something that actually can reduce the government spending, the excessive government spending at the local level. The more educated constituents they have, the less they will spend on administrative spending. So by increasing the budget transparency and informing more of the informing the constituents more about the budget of the local governments, perhaps it will also help strengthening the accountability at the local level. So I guess I end my presentation at that point, and it's back to you, Ms. Stacy.
Thank you very much, Saludya. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of questions, curiosities, or just comments. Learning from yesterday, it seems that because the presenter is only one, it's easier to immediately raise your hand if you want to ask and then answer it directly. Will that help, Ms. Coco? Yes. Yes? Okay. Anyone, please? I have the floor. Yes. Please state your name, where you're from, and then you can fire away to Coco.
Sure, I'm Audrey. I'm from Pan Support Facility. So I have two questions. First is technical. You mentioned that you treated distance to Jakarta as a time invariant characteristic. Given that geographic boundaries are changing throughout the whole time period, that would be time invariant, wouldn't it be? Second, and I was wondering then how you calculated it, and if there are geographic boundary data for that whole time period available. Second, I want to hear more about your assumption that administrative spending is wasteful, rent-seeking behavior. It could be, for example, that districts are hiring well-qualified teachers and civil servants, and if that's the case, then it's not wasteful.
Okay, for the time, for the distance, basically, yeah, this is, we can get the distance variable from there's a GPS. I got the data for GPS statistics from using satellites that actually look at the capital of the kabupaten and then try to measure it to Jakarta. So that's how we get the distance. And yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of the distance. Yes, if they split, it changes, but because I only got it for like one, so I cannot really get the distance for districts. So in this case, then we just make an approximation of, when we look at how the way it splits and then try to make an approximation of the distance. So the distance of the parent remain the same, but distance of the child, we make an approximation based on the calculation that we have from this map, which was done by my colleague in Germany, basically.
Okay, so both are approximations.
For the child, yeah.
And for the parent.
Yeah, for the parents, yeah, because it's using the satellite, basically. Okay. And for the staff, we are trying to be very careful about this. Therefore, when we're looking at the economic classification and see the staff, we try to make sure that the ones that we use in our data do not include teachers' salaries, do not include doctors, nurses, and everything. And because basically they are supposed to expenditures for doctors, nurses, teachers supposed to be reported under direct, not indirect. If you're looking at the Permendagri 13 type of classification, so we use that to make sure that we don't include these. So what we are looking at is basically all the staff expenditures for administration that falls under this that falls under these offices, under general government, and also to do this this so-called function under general government administration. But it was yeah, a little bit tricky, to be honest, because then you have to really go through to the pandemic 13 sort of like format instead of the one that is usually available at the DAPU website.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. Just in a similar vein on capital, is it specifically capital for offices and administration as opposed to capital that would actually benefit citizens? Was the data coding allow you to make that distinction?
Would you kindly introduce
Sorry,
yourself?
I'm Bernard Myers from the Public Sector Division.
Thank you.
Yes, because the way the Amendment 13, this is the way the reporting regulations from the major promoters. Based on the guidance, all those expenditures that are not directly provided for the public services, which was basically here for government administration. So we try to follow that definition and look at the data. It's not, I have to say, it's not like all the districts do not have the same discipline level when it comes to following the rules and regulation, and therefore you really need to look at the data carefully, and then you can sort of spot when they have these little bumps here and there, and then try to figure out, okay, then what did they do? Did they miss classification something here? And yeah, so that kind of exercise has to be done sometimes.
And then if I could just follow on and say a different question. For the variables, do you expect that some might be correlated, like, for example, the literacy or the education level and the urbanization? I mean, are those possibly linked, and so that you're kind of picking up the same thing? And there are other things like that that might be linked?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we try to do basically with. I mean, the one that I presented is only done in Photo LS, and then we also did the fixed effect, which was fine. But then to fix that, we actually ran a GMM, and unfortunately in GMM everything dies. So, but I was just hoping that just to stimulate discussion, we have these findings based on the fixed effect, and then the OLS. But you're right. I mean, in some of the specification, you don't see the variations anymore, although you can still capture the economies of scale, and then also the political concentration and everything that stays. So the one that I stated there is basically the one that also survived after we did the GMM.
More questions, comments? Yes, please. Your name and where you're from?
Yes. My name is Darius Tirta Suharnoko from Indonesia. Quite impressive with one of your findings, which is more ethnically homogeneous population is related to more wasteful recipe. And I think it's a nice study that you've done. I just wonder whether you follow up with more of a conversation or probably has a discussion with the people in the region, whether the finding is actually correlated with the fact many of the kepala daerah, which is the leader in the region, actually hire people from from the same ethnic group like he or she, or what's the outcome from this study? Because I think it's a nice study, but I'm afraid that if you just put it like this without any follow up on whether this is true or not, it could be create a kind of different perception between among us. So I wonder whether that's something that you have done. And also, the other interesting thing is the fact that region, they tend more, they spend more on the administrative expenditure. And one of the the interesting things about this is, I guess they have a capacity, like fiscal capacity, and in some of the fund that they have, I think it's related also to the resource sharing fund. I wonder whether the reason behind the more administrative spending is just because we know that there are a lot of pollution and rent-seeking behind the scene when the regions are more richer in terms of exploring or exploiting their natural resources. And because of that reason, there's a like a motivation for them actually to spend more, and probably they know that if they spend more on the capital expenditure is actually quite challenging because there are a lot of issues. So the way they do it actually is to spend more on the administrative expenditure, because we know that in spending in capital expenditure, they have to deal with the land issue, they have to deal with the also the management issue of a project. So I just wonder whether that that kind of problem probably can explain more on your finding, which is, I think, is very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, Pak Dari, just to respond to your second question about that, I think that is exactly what we are trying to show, the fact that we try to control all these sort of technology variables, that is sort of the technology that they need in order to provide administration services. It's kind of like we control for this, and then we still see that the administrative spending is high. We control for the splitting, we see that the administrative spending is high. And then when we put the political variables, and then we start seeing all this variation explained by these political variables. I think what you're saying about, and then we also control for the resource-rich region. We control it using a couple of indicators, like, for example, the share of the oil and gas in the GDP, and then we also have, I think the one that we use in the specification that was presented. We also use a dummy that actually gives you that is one if they have shared natural resource revenue from the intergovernmental fiscal transfer to control for what you said about the fact that this research districts might this resource-rich region, and so we do control for that, and then we still see this high administrative expenditures. So this is why I think this behavior might be due to the fact that there is this rent-seeking activities, because we have this anecdotal evidence from all these reports about these districts, about this Bupati and Wali Kota that actually misappropriate the budget. And it's in a way illegal because it's in the budget, so they do not corrupt it in that way. They just use it on themselves. Now the issue is then it will not be efficient, because if they use 30% of the budget to spend it on themselves, automatically it will be less for the service delivery. So I think that's what that's one of the point that we're trying to make. And to respond to your question about the ethnic first, I mean, I personally haven't followed up any of these findings to the region. A colleague of mine, he actually presented it to the Ministry of Home Affairs, and I think they were discussing some of these issues as well. But I think one thing for sure that would be interesting to do as a follow-up study is to do a mixed method study to sort of like look at to sort of look at the administrative spending, the size of it, and then to look at all kinds of corruption activities and nepotism at the local level, and to see whether or not these activities can actually explain the variation or the size of the administrative spending. So I think that would also be something that is interesting and can give more lights on what's exactly going on in the country.
I think I agree with that. We heard so much about the nepotism going on in the region. But I guess if you study it, eventually if you write it in the paper, I think it's also good if you can have some evidence more based on the study and also from the follow-up study or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
The other thing that can also interesting, I mean, to use in an empirical setup, is to find these sort of like governance indicators that are available for all kabupaten kota. Like if there is any like corruption indicators, nepotism indicators, or transparency indicators that are available for all 477 kabupaten kota, that would be great. We try to explore the possibility. Unfortunately, so far, based on our understanding, ICW is the one that actually keep track of all these corruption cases, but they're not really, but their database is not really structured in a way that you can use for an empirical analysis. So perhaps something for us to think about, and I think that should be interesting to have if we have this kind of indicators. Like even if we have the business survey, for example, unfortunately these business surveys, they did not do it in all kabupaten kota. So I guess in order to do a final analysis of all kabupaten kota in this way, we should at least have the corruption indicators that are available at the kabupaten kota level.
We still have time. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ridwan from Bank Indonesia. And I'm very much interested to have your presentations about overspending in administrative overspending in major districts. Nonetheless, I have 3 questions, or maybe we can have some discussion further. And first of all is about, you try to measure you try to explain the administrative spending basically. And following the previous comments, I'm very much have something in common with the previous commentators. So basically, there is such kind of reverse causality problem that we may see here, because if you see spending is also can be explained by fiscal revenue, which can be reflected by also because of the resource-rich regions. Basically, they can have this income from fiscal revenue. That's what we call is, I forget such notion in English, but basically they have this sharing from these fiscal revenues. Another thing is also, you try to have another variable, basically what to control the variable is real gross domestic per capita, as far as I understand it. It's also very much correlated with resource-rich indicator. And these things that might bring you some serious problems with your inferences. And the second thing is, I'm wondering about the data you use here, because there is also, actually we're also working on this area of regional studies in FKP Indonesia. As far as I understand, we use the data of this maybe from Bappenas data, basically, or maybe, I don't know. But so far, that based on our data, we have tried to check. Maybe you can evaluate the data, you can argue that. But so far, it's that using data from district level, especially right now, is really very much problematic so far. But maybe you can explain, maybe you can have a better source of this, okay? And last but not the least is about the variable of distance. I also share with the previous comments. I wonder why you put distance Jakarta here, and what exactly you want to capture, what you want to explain, having this sort of connected with this administrative spending. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I start with the distance to Jakarta. The reason why we include this variable is because in the previous format of local budget report, you can see under routine expenditures there is a travel expenditure. And these official travels required is done basically by the DPRD members, by the Bupati and Wali Kota to travel to Jakarta. So we are including the distance to Jakarta in order to capture the fact that perhaps they need to spend more if they are located far from Jakarta, if they need to go to Jakarta to coordinate with the Ministry of Home Affairs, for example, or to coordinate with the Ministry of Finance. So this is one of the reasons why we include the distance to Jakarta variable. About using the district level data, we are using the data that is provided by the Ministry of Finance from the Sistem Informasi Keuangan Daerah. So we're not using anything from Bappenas, basically. It is quite tricky because throughout the period that we observe, there are at least three budget reporting mechanisms. So you need to make an adjustment in order to make sure that you have a consistent definition of spending from one year to another. So I think, but I think Ministry of Finance, the SIKD team actually did some exercise on that, and we consulted them on that, and then that's why we are able to actually have this sectoral classification and then the economic classification. And I think this is also something that the subnational team here in the bank has been working very closely with the Ministry of Finance on this issue as well. I forgot your third questions.
The reverse causality.
Oh, that was the first. Oh, yes, because I'm starting from that. Yes, you're right. I mean, it's true, as I said before. I mean, some of the reverse causality, yes, there's a few endogeneity issue here, and as I said, I mean, we also try to do the GMM, and unfortunately, the stories did not survive. However, the one that we presented, like the political concentration, it did survive. The story on the fiscal revenue, and then so yeah, I mean, the reason why I presented these results is basically to start a discussion. I mean, it will be a very tricky econometrically to prove, because so far what we did is using the GMM. We try to find the best possible instrument variable for this, but we couldn't, to be honest. It was quite difficult to find the best instrument for it, and it was difficult. But nonetheless, we thought that, look, what we have is quite interesting to discuss. It survived the fixed effect, it survived some specifications, survived the GMM, so we thought, you know, to stimulate story and to stimulate policies, we presented to get some ideas of it. But you're absolutely right. In terms of the technical, there's the reverse causality, endogeneity issues that need to be tackled. Well, yeah, that needs to be tackled.
Are we ready for the next one?
I think we could wait until
We can have a little break. So if there's no more questions, we can have a short break. Oh, yes,
Yeah, I
please.
think I have one question.
Please, please.
Thank you. My name is Niwa. I'm from RTI International. So it's interesting presentation. In the slides number 6, I guess, on that graph, we can also see from time 2001 until 2009 that the mean of administrative spending has been not so significantly reduced by the process of democratization. But on the other hand, by having this split effect, by having this democratization, that also means that the government spends more on administration to have the direct general election for the head district, right? So does that mean in a way that we could see that the district government can use or can spend the budget allocation to to push some other administration budget? I mean, to make the budget allocation more effective by by although spending more for election, direct general election, but they still can have not so significantly increasing overspending, still constantly on the high level of overspending. So I mean, do you get what I mean, or still not?
I'm afraid not, I'm sorry.
How do you think they spend more for the direct general election, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in logically speaking, then to which allocation of the budget that they reduce so that the administrative overspending is constant from the time or from the period before the election and after the general direct election? Does they sacrifice something else? For example, like the staff, does they reduce the number of the staff or something like that? How do you explain this?
Okay. For the direct election, unfortunately, I don't have it ready. But the way they put the budget for direct election, they classify it under other categories. So in this economic classification, there's this capital and staff and others, as I presented before. And we have another research that actually look at political budget cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can see that the other expenditures become significant before the election and then during the election, and then it's even more significant when the incumbent is running again for election. That's why we call it a political budget cycle. Unfortunately, it's another paper that we don't present here. So,
is it the study already done or still under?
It is already done.
Okay. What's
It's
the name?
in economic matters. Yes. So I can send you the link to the study. But basically, but basically, in terms of the spending for the direct election, they classify it in others, and they take it according to the law. They need to provide a counterpart funding. So it's not only covered 100% by the districts, but the KPU and the central government also subsidize the election at the local level, right? So what we see is from others, and we haven't done analysis that look at all sector altogether to actually the dynamic of it. If one sector increase, how about the others? We did a study that actually looked at the three main sectors that are health, education, and infrastructure. And but from just the descriptive analysis that we have, whenever I think they're not taking it from the other posts of the administrative spending. It seems like they're not taking it from the other posts of the administrative spending, but they're taking it from other sectors. I mean, it's not like huge one from health or a huge one from education. I don't think that's not the case, but they will, to some extent, reduce a fraction of spending on this sector in order to finance for direct election. But that is an interesting finding by itself. The other interesting thing is the fact that other expenditure is significantly higher when the incumbent is running for re-election. And it turns out that there are anecdotal evidence that shows that through this other government category, they are allowed to give subsidies to local regions, they are allowed to give subsidies to, so there is this budget item that called subsidi to kelompok masyarakat, subsidi kepada daerah bawah, which in a way they can use to buy votes. Because then, you know, if I'm an incumbent, I have this pocket of money on my disposal. I mean, I can easily build a mosque, for example, or give a donation to a church, or and then we found some anecdotal evidence of this as well, that actually, you know, the incumbents starts giving away some money to the villages when they are up for election the next year. So these things do happen. It is a bit difficult to actually because again, I think a mixed method study would actually help in order to figure out the way it works, to have a case study at the local level to actually identify these things, and then to accompany it with a quantitative study at the national level to actually look how the dynamics evolves. But at least the study on the political budget cycle so far indicate that there is this sort of increasing spending on other expenditures before the election, particularly when the incumbent is running for elections.
Yes, Ruth. From last questions for today.
Yes, so
Where are you from?
I'm Ruth from the World Bank, the macro fiscal policy team. Just wondering, Mas, is there any result or discussion that the overspending behavior from the subnational government, the district and province government, is simply because of they just receive too much? I mean, they have too much revenue, and in that case, because it's pretty unique what happened in the district and district and province, because most of the revenue come from central government. So perhaps we can think that one way or one policy implication, perhaps like reducing the transfer from central government, reducing the amount from central government to local government. And right now we're dealing with the deficit thing in the central government. So does this study also discuss that thing, or is there any interesting finding about that?
This particular study did not discuss that, but I understand that our colleagues here in the bank actually they've been advocating about how to make a more efficient spending, right? So it's not about increasing the revenue or increasing the spending to each particular sector, but it's about the composition of the spending itself. It's about a reallocation from one sector to another to make it more efficient. I think some of the growth diagnostic produced by the subnational team kind of like advocate that. The other thing about the revenue that the local government receive, I think one thing that I think currently is also in the draft of the revised decentralization law is the fact that they will transfer the property tax to the districts. And I think by increasing the revenue management power of the districts, that in a way it will strengthen the accountability, because then now the constituents will pay tax directly to the local government, so it will be basically shorten the accountability channel. So I hope by doing that, well, not I hope, but well, I hope as well, but I think what the bank is currently advocating is the fact that if the revenue decentralization is increased, that is in a way will strengthen the currently weak accountability from the budget side. That more or less answer the questions.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, we can close this session. Thank you very much for everyone's comments, questions, and inputs. And we can have a short break. The restroom is close by, and there's coffee and tea there, while we are waiting for the next presentation on informal risk management. Let's give a big round of applause to everyone.